So, hello everybody. My name is Philip Shepherd. I am the Secretary General of IPRA, the International Public Relations Association. If you would like to join IPRA after hearing this webinar, you're very welcome to do so. You'll find us at www.ipra.org. Today we have another of our monthly webinars, and this time it's a little bit different in character. We've got a group discussion taking place. It's a bunch of people, all of whom are from the USA, from different disciplines there. And Gemma amongst that group is going to be the sort of the moderator of those discussions. So we're much looking forward to that. And the general theme, as you'd have seen from the title, is all about the connection of ideas and communication and sustainability, how we can be more sustainable in what we do. So we're going to be learning from those people. It will last about 40 minutes or so. We'll then come back for a question and answer session. I will help to moderate that. As we go along, you'll see there's a Q&A tab where you can pop questions in, and I will field those to our panel towards the end of the session. You're also able to put your hand up to ask a question live and do that towards the end of the event. And I will invite you to pose a question live also to the panel. So without anything further, over to Gemma, who will introduce everybody and tell you where they come from and why they're here today. Thank you, Gemma.
Great, thank you so much. We are very excited to be with you today to talk about a topic that is important to all of us, and that topic is sustainability, and specifically the role of communications, which in one way or another is the industry that all of us work in. So we have with us today on this panel three terrific folks who have agreed to join us. So first, I am Gemma Gould, and I am the Chief Sustainability Officer of IPG. And with us, in addition to that, we have Jessie Nagel, who is co-founder of Green the Bid, and she also owns her own communications company, which is called Hype. We have Laura Sutphin, who is the Managing Director of Social Purpose and Sustainability at Golan, which is one of IPG's PR firms. And finally, we have Katie White, who is an account director at the Martin Agency, which is also part of IPG. So, Katie, I introduced you last, but I'm going to start the questions with you. And I see for some reason we're not seeing Laura, but I'm hoping she's still connected.
I'm still here.
Okay, great.
I have no idea what is happening with the video, but I'm going to try and troubleshoot while I talk.
Okay,
Central
awesome.
Town in Chicago is getting to you, Laura.
Exactly. Okay, so Katie, let's see. You, when we talked about setting up this panel, you had given me an interesting statistic, which talked about the fact that a Harvard Business Review study showed us that 65% of consumers tell us that they want to make more sustainable choices, but less than half of them actually followed through on making those choices. So I wanted to get a sense from you about how you think brands can help to close what we've referred to as this intention-action gap.
Yes, the intention-action gap for consumers is quite a challenge. And, you know, I think that Harvard Business Review came out a couple of years ago, that study, and recently Google found the same thing, and it's even higher now. About 4 out of 5 consumers say they want to make green choices, but few actually do. We're finding the same trend, unfortunately, with brands. IBM put out a study recently that said CEOs cite sustainability as a top priority, but they lack the insights to actually take action. And that second piece to me is really what spurred a deeper dive into that, especially at the Martin Agency. We thought, well, how can we help close that intention action gap? Better insights. So we did some research. There's a lot out there about the intention action gap in its entirety, the challenges that it presents, but we really didn't find a deep well of actionable insights that answered the question, what's truly preventing people from taking action? So as an agency, we want to help brands close that gap both for consumers and themselves. So we built an open source tool at the Martin Agency to help fill that gap. It's called the Sustainability Tension Map. If you check it out, maybe I'll put it in the chat afterward. You can just look up tensionmap.com/sustainability. But it's really a wealth of consumer tensions or barriers that brands can actually help solve. So the tool really outlines the problem. It has supporting data, articles. It includes recommended provocations. The act almost says mini briefs that brands could tackle or specific industries. But we've also layered, and I think this is probably the most powerful thing, because we find sometimes that with a wealth of insights, it can be overwhelming and you're not sure which one to tackle first. We layered in an impact score that helps brands prioritize what tensions they could actually tackle and what would make an impact. There's a couple different things about that scoring system, which for those who want to check it out, I'll let you take a look and take a deeper dive. But it's really based off of 3 criteria. Does it make an impact, which we partnered with Sustainable Brands and Project Drawdown data to find those top 9 sustainable consumer behaviors. 2 is social listening. Is it top of mind for consumers? And then 3 is, to what degree is this actually a pain point? We did some proprietary research to find out if these tensions were truly tensions and barriers and bothering consumers. So I think there's a lot of different ways brands can take action to help consumers, but starting from a place of a real problem for consumers that's preventing them from taking that action can help close that gap and also help brands avoid greenwashing. You know, if they're building ideas from a place of a real consumer truth, not only can they help them take action, but they can help make meaningful change that's real and not disingenuous.
Okay, that's amazing. Thank you. And I think it would be great if you can share a link to the tension map.
Can I do that at the same time? I will do that right now.
I think so. But, you know, look, I think you talked about a number of things that I want to sort of continue the thread on, one of which is, or 2, impact and action. And so when it comes to those 2 things, I think about Green the Bid because I think what has impressed me so much about Green the Bid is how much they're really doing on the ground to take action and make an impact. And so that's my maybe not so clever way of, Jesse, throwing it over to you because I think some of the folks who are listening to us and watching us today may know what Green the Bid is, but I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what Green the Bid is, how you're making an impact, and how folks can get involved.
Thanks, Gemma. Well, kind of like Katie, you know, we saw there are 5 co-founders of Green the Bid, which is a non-profit grassroots organization. We're all volunteer, and we're a global group, a community, and a network of people trying to shift the industry, the advertising industry, and production and post-production and specific to sustainable and regenerative practices. And it's sort of what Katie's talking about, which is we observed this gap. There wasn't one place that we felt people could go to find very key actionable steps that they could take. So while people were saying, hey, let's make some pledges towards doing it, just the idea of where they could find the information, I think felt very overwhelming to many people. And we also were coming from the industry and trying to shift it, kind of like Katie is too, looking at the way that we do business and saying, how can we make these adjustments? And they might be big ones, but how can we make them while still working alongside the way that our workflow goes so that people could feel like, hey, I can see how I can get from A to B. And it's not like you're asking me to totally change what I do for a living, but you're saying, how can I adapt it? And I think one of the big parts about our organization is that we're a completely non-shame environment. So you come to it at whatever point you are. And like Katie's tool, you can jump into it and say, I don't know anything about this. Or you can say, hey, I'm somewhere along this journey and I want to either help others or I want to learn from them. It's a constant iteration that we're involved in. So we're always looking at how can we do better? How can we break down silos and barriers and ultimately bring people together as a community to work pre-competitively in this space?
I love that pre-competitive piece because I think that's just so essential to how we need to be working in this space. And I know that, you know, there are a number of industry organizations that are working on that. So thank you, Jesse. That is amazing. And then Laura, since you're back on camera, yay. I want to talk to you a little bit. You know, I think a term that a lot of us are hearing lately is environmental justice. And I've heard it defined a number of ways. And then I've also heard people very honestly say, I don't really know what that means. And so I know Golan recently did a survey or a study about this. So I wonder if you could talk to us just a little bit about what you found out about the way people and specifically executives are thinking about environmental justice and where you see an opportunity there to make a difference.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So, our practice, the social impact and inclusion practice, is grounded in intersectionality. And that is the way that we look at all environmental issues and social impact issues, whether it's, architecting a purpose for a brand, or if it's looking at ESG indicators and creating a roadmap for a client. And, one of the things that our team noticed about a year ago was that for all of the scientific study on environmental justice, there was no data and there was no study out there that actually looked at the role of business in charting effective solutions. We've been in a cycle over the last few years with the murder of George Floyd around brands and agencies and organizations doubling down on their DEI commitments. And ESG reporting is front of mind for so many businesses. It's also now going to be it's regulated, so it's not a nice to have, it's a must have. But we noticed that there was very few alignment between those two departments, and that there was an opportunity to take greater action. And so we commissioned the first ever study that looked at we studied what consumers believed or knew about environmental justice. And then we talked to about 200 C-suite leaders to ask them what they knew about environmental justice and what they felt the role of their business was in charting solutions. What we found was really interesting. It is not on the radar screen of corporations. It is not on the radar screen of the C-suite, though they say there is definitely a say-do gap. 91% of them believed that it was important to take action around issues of environmental justice. But when we probed further, less than 50% of them said that they felt like it would lead to any tangible outcomes for communities of color. And it's such an interesting time to be asking that question, because just yesterday, Jackson, Mississippi is back in the headlines, and it's actually being called apartheid, that that city is still without access to fresh drinking water. It is 2023, and we are still talking about this issue, and it is having outsized impact on Black and Brown communities if they can't have access. I mean, we're talking about basic health requirements, and those are all environmentally driven. So it's striking a chord for me today in particular, but we really found quite a lot of blind spots with C-suite leaders. Some, even saying that this isn't an issue of race. Some saying that they didn't understand how a company could do anything meaningful. And every single time, if you make a widget or you make a product and you have to build a manufacturing facility and you're building it in places like Jackson or in Newark, the outsized chemical runoff impact, emissions impacts in those communities of color who are already struggling with having access to clean water or access to healthy food is, you're doubling down on the negative impacts in those communities. So we found quite a lot of tension points, a lot of blind spots for corporations. And we see that as one of the most impactful areas that a company can take action on to leapfrog its ESG performance, make meaningful gains around their DEI commitments, and marry the two for greater outcomes for the world. And I can drop a link to the chat of the survey and the study.
I think that would be great, Laura, because I've heard you talk about it a number of times, and it's just each time I'm sort of fascinated. And the clean water issue is something that, continues just personally to drive me crazy. And, it is so hard to just understand how it's still happening. And it's something that we at IPG have taken a look at and made a commitment to. But it's just something we need to continually think about, just not just the clean water piece, the sanitation piece. So it's just unbelievable to know how much is still happening and not happening in that space. So thank you for that. And then Katie, I want to circle back to you for a minute and talk a little bit about clients. Many of us who are part of this webinar, we work very closely with our clients. And so I want to just get an understanding from you, if we can, about whether clients are coming to you with sustainability assignments, and if they are, what they're asking for, or if they're coming to you with assignments where you see sort of a way that sustainability could play a role and how that's panning out.
Sure, sure. And I'd love to hear from Laura on this as well. I think the answer is yes and no. Some clients are coming to us with specific sustainability assignments, mostly in the CSR space. So they have a partnership or an internal initiative that perhaps they want design help with, or a creative idea to help really shape that idea from a CSR perspective. However, what we are seeing more of is clients asking a lot of questions. They're asking about the changing landscape. They're asking about cultural conversations. Clients are asking things like, how Gen Z cares about purpose-driven brands, specifically sustainable action. How can I authentically tap into this? We have, potentially some shared values, or we have sustainability goals. Should we be doing something bigger with it? Or I want to take bigger sustainable actions, that gap, but I'm afraid we'll be canceled or labeled as greenwashers or something in the wrong way. I think that gives me hope, actually. I think CEOs and CMOs are starting to recognize that there's value being left on the table, that we don't need to relegate sustainability to the CSR space. It's not just one work stream. It should be an integrated solution or business strategy, as Jesse and Laura just, talked about. So I think they've bought now into the why. 10 years ago, I think you had to sell people on why is sustainability important. But now we're having to solve for the how. So all these tools, Jesse's Green the Bid work with how do you do it in a production standpoint, our attention map, the work that Laura's doing with, environmental justice, getting those insights and helping bridge that gap. I think that's where we can really bring those solutions for how do you do it, and in the most creative breakthrough way that keeps it top of mind and doesn't just relegate it to some specific green space, that it really needs to be integrated throughout the entire system.
Yeah, which makes total sense. I don't know, Laura, do you want to just talk a little bit about your clients as well?
Yeah, sure. It's been an interesting last few years. We saw on so many levels, but we saw, so many clients asking for guidance around how to speak out meaningfully on major social issues, right? How do they not step in it? How do they communicate with impact? How do they live into and stay true to commitments that they're making in the wake of, George Floyd's murder and the racial uprising from 2020? And now we're in an interesting cycle of greenwashing. And, I recently saw an article with like 7 different sub-terms of greenwashing, which just makes it even more complex and confusing for everyday people. But our clients are coming to us in 2 fashions right now, and we're really busy. One, they're asking more surgical questions about wanting to get it right. They want to align with a cause where they can make a tangible impact. And they want to make sure that it's truly going to make a meaningful difference as opposed to being performative. So we're doing a lot of analysis and shaping, ESG roadmaps and creative campaigns around taking meaningful action on a social issue. That is front and center of our client request right now. And the other thing is a bit of sort of language strategy. How do we get this right? How do we talk about it in ways that are clear and specific, don't overshoot, but is also not creating even more confusion, because this is such a confusing topic to begin with terminology that and buzzwords that are changing week by week. So we're doing a lot of language strategy in addition to shaping meaningful creative campaigns that are, aligning to what we call making true impact, which is different than communications impact, right? True impact is a key measurement that we employ based on what we call a meaningful role for our clients. And that is, true impact is lives saved, people, how many people have more access to fresh drinking water or healthy food versus communication impact, which is what a lot of CMOs are judging their sustainability or social issue campaigns against, which is like how many impressions or SOV or classic communications indicator. But that isn't making the world a better place. That is spreading a message meaningfully. So we're doing a lot of work in those key areas.
Okay, and that's incredibly helpful. And so, speaking of making the world a better place, Jesse, I'm going to come back to you. No pressure. But I guess I wanted to ask you. You're a communications professional. You're one of the founders of Green the Bid. How do you sort of see the role of Green the Bid in the way communications is evolving in our industry?
Well, communications obviously is evolving in so many ways. And as Laura talked about, there is even this disconnect at times between the way that people are communicating or evaluating what they're doing. And we want to be able to bring those two things together. Obviously, language is really vitally important. I mean, don't get me started on carbon offsets. I think we really need to find a new term for this, right? And so there are so many of those instances that as you get into this kind of conversation or these conversations, you start to go, okay, this is actually, if the origin of it wasn't created to obfuscate, there's been a lot of obfuscation that's been done, unfortunately, by our communications community, sometimes to help with kind of pernicious activity on the kind of hard end. And then, sometimes just because people don't necessarily have the tools to be more thoughtful around the language. And again, I'm not saying that we as comms people are sloppy. I don't think we try to be. And in fact, we're pretty good at detecting BS, which is what can make us such powerful, allies in this space. But I think we do need to connect these things to say it can't just be impressions. We can't just say we're doing something and then not have the resources to do it. And we need to be able to talk to each other in a more transparent way so that we're not in a position of covering up. I mean, I think what's happened is people have worked in silos for a long time, as if kind of sustainability or D&I is something that you hold close. If we do that, we're never going to get anywhere. And in fact, we have the opportunity, I think, to be the engineers of what this future could look like, but only if we're doing it with the backing of these studies, with resources, looking at this chain, right? We're looking at kind of scope 3 production side, but how does that ladder all the way up into the other things that brands, agencies, production are doing? If we're not thinking about it as the whole, if we're not engaging our comms teams in saying, not only how are we thinking about it externally, but how are we talking about this internally? Because we even find that sometimes people come to Green the Bid, as we've all talked to you, and they join, and then they're tasked with, how am I rolling this out to my community, to all of these individual producers, let's say? How do we get them to really understand how that links to a bigger picture? Because it all does. You're talking about something like as fundamental as access to fresh water. And we're talking about how you expend resources, and even the kind of human rights or labor issues that are connected to that, because people have the right to be paid equitably in this space in order to be able to make it happen. So there are many different things that I'm thinking about every day from that comm standpoint, even as simple, and I'll say air quotes around simple, as community building. And what does that really mean for us?
Thank you. I mean, that's incredibly helpful. And I'm glad you brought up the point about equitable pay, Jesse, because of how key an issue that is, but also because I just think it sort of widens the lens about how we think about sustainability and even what we call it, since we're all communications professionals. But I guess when I think about it, it is sort of more in a broad way, and all the issues that fall under ESG. And there are a lot of them, and it can be a little bit overwhelming. But we don't want to forget any of them, because I think they all overlap, and they are all part of the picture. I think each of us has mentioned the word greenwashing. And so it's a term that I've seen come up a lot from all different parts of our community, and many different stakeholders. And I think it's something incredibly important for us as communications professionals. And so, Katie, I just want to ask you about kind of how you at the Martin Agency are thinking about greenwashing. How do you advise your clients, and how do you make sure that it's something that we're not doing at the end of the day, right? I mean, so.
Well, for legal reasons, I should first and foremost say partner with your business affairs or legal teams, first and foremost.
Yeah.
There are honestly a lot of regulatory claims that we have to be mindful of. Laura mentioned this. We're getting cracked down on even from other regulatory groups. FTC is starting to build out some green guides that we're going to need to be taking a closer look at. But beyond that, I think greenwashing really starts at the brief, both from clients and internally. And we have to be looking at how we're making decisions across the creative process. So starting with the brief, having those real consumer truths or tensions woven into the brief that can help avoid disingenuous, work that is untrue or perhaps, greenwashing is the word that we use. There's 7 sins of greenwashing, and oftentimes it stems from just blatantly lying, unfortunately, even if unintentional. So I think it's important to have a network to gut check the work. So at the Martin Agency, we have an ERG called the Green Team. It's just a collection of passionate individuals. Some people have background in sustainability, like myself. I have a degree. Others are just passionate and, have done a lot of exploratory work in that space. But it's similar to the groups that we have in diversity and inclusion as well, where we vet for a specific community's experience. We do the same for sustainability. So brands and agencies or teams will share out the work to us, and we'll say, well, does this feel truthful? We'll call bullshit if it feels disingenuous. So we have caught a couple of ideas where internal teams have shared work with us, and we've said, I love the intention and the truth is right, but the execution of it doesn't quite hit the mark. These are some of the unintended consequences that you might not be thinking about, or this scientific report actually says the opposite of what you're trying to claim. So that's helped shape some ideas and maybe avoided some greenwashing mistakes, but we're not perfect. If things don't get vetted, we have seen some of our work go out that, I'll be honest, is borderline greenwashing. And we've gotten questions from press about it. And I think that's good. Honestly, I appreciate that the PR and the media are calling out brands to say, are you actually doing that? So the point about measurement is so important. I love the term you used, Laura. I'm going to borrow that. True impact. It's hard to figure out how you're going to measure things. And who's actually going to measure that? Is it real? But I think having that network to start from the idea first, the insights first, and then making sure you have the right measurement will all help avoid greenwashing. Again, for legal reasons, make sure you also include them. But
you always want to include the legal folks. Yes,
absolutely. I'm a big proponent of our legal and VA friends, but I think we can do a lot more before it even gets to them.
Okay. And then Laura, do you want to weigh in on that greenwashing piece as well?
I could talk about this for the rest of the hour. And Katie, you're so nice about it because I'm not that nice about it. I do love what you said about it needs to start at the brief. And we have a framework that we use to challenge all of our briefs, which is a key question that we just plainly ask our clients at the beginning of any assignment, which is, do you want to perform, reform, or transform? And if you want to perform, that's being performative, right? You want to just keep on doing what you're doing. Then you have high risk of greenwash, right? If you
Has
want
anyone actually said yes to that? That's what I really
That's really interesting when you ask the question.
Yeah, good point.
Because it is in what they don't say that gives us our answer. And it helps us then, go back to the brief and interrogate. And it also prevents the question that everybody gets, which is when you ask a client, who's an aspirational brand for you? And 99.4% of them say Patagonia or Ben & Jerry's, but 99.9% of those brands that you ask the question of cannot be Patagonia or Ben & Jerry's.
That's right.
So it helps us really kind of have a real talk about what is feasible for your business, for the cycle of your business, where you are in the evolution of your sustainability or your impact journey, and what are the tangible steps and what is the roadmap that is required for you to get there. So you don't put a campaign out into the world that is at odds with what you are doing in your own business operations. And anyone who knows me knows that one of my favorite things to say is that we have to help you match your insides with your outsides. So don't put it into the world if you can't show tangibly in meaningful ways that you're doing it on the inside of your core business functions. But that is a helpful mechanism that we use. Do you want to be performative, reformative, or transformative? Most brands live in reformative, right?
Mm-hmm.
They are backing their way into their sustainability impacts or to their purpose ambition. They were not born that way. You were not born like a Patagonia, but you recognize that you have a meaningful role to play in society in making that true impact happen, because true impact begets business impact. And then the communications impact is a piece of cake. So it is a key question that we ask. And we also let organizations know that it is okay to be reformative. Like that's it. I would rather you be in reform than say that you want to transform when you're really greenwashing and you don't even know it. So though we mind for those gaps when we get a brief, and it really helps us help our clients match their insides with their outsides.
Can I ask a quick question on that? I know we have kind of, this is a good conversation. I am curious because we have some clients who have a desire to do things, but they maybe don't have the insides quite right yet. So they're afraid to do something. Have you found that gap as well? And how would you counsel a brand to do something about that if their insides aren't quite ready yet? Would you say don't do anything, or?
So I'm about to have that conversation with a brand in 4 hours who is launching a product later this fall. It's in Europe. They're bringing it to the United States. I've had it. It's pretty delicious, but the way that they want to in their heads, they feel that they've done some meaningful research that in their minds they think is impact-driven research, but it actually is good consumer research, right? It's good consumer insights about their target audience. But they keep dropping words like, well, we want to be like Dove Real Beauty, or we want to be like, but they haven't sort of studied the source of the problem effectively to create a journey that would lead them to have impacts like a Dove Real Beauty. So I think one of the hardest jobs, it's my favorite, but I am a brutal truth person. I'm real talk all the time. I think one of the hardest jobs of a sustainability communications counselor is we are in the business of truth, and we are going to lead our clients astray and help them down the greenwashing path if we are not brave enough to have the conversations that need to be had. And like I said, there's no wrong answer, right? This is a journey. And so we do find a lot of sort of internal siloed speaking of, people who haven't looked at the outside world and they're caught up in their silo inside their business function. I get it. I worked in-house a couple of years ago. I left agency life and went in-house, and I get it. I know how that can happen. And you sort of forget to punch a hole in the outside world. So we have to be the brave truth sayers to help make sure that our clients stay safe, don't live in performative greenwashing, but also find their meaningful journey. So it's a hard role, but it's a beloved role.
Oh my gosh, I think it sounds like an amazing, amazing role. I'm so excited about this idea of, we have to have really honest conversations with people, right? But also give them the tools to get there and to say, hey, you're not going to, you're this, you're not going to be this. And that is okay, right? People aren't going to have that expectation necessarily. When we're talking to people, one of the things that we say in Green the Bid side is, we have to have a great understanding about what production, for example, looks like in one part of the world versus another part of the world. We have to be mindful that if we're coming from one part of the world and going to another, that we're not doing something that is creating damage in another part of the world, and think about the implications of that. When people are looking at transforming what they do internally, I love what you said, Katie, about the brief, because so much of it is about what are we doing from that origin point? How are we matching what's happening on the screen with what we're doing behind the scenes so that those things are united? Laura and I have talked briefly about things like award shows and what are we rewarding people for? What are we looking at in terms of long lasting impact, right? Because sometimes in comms, unfortunately, the downside could be a little bit of stunt work. Again, I'm not saying that most people do this. I think we're moving away from that. But even if you're doing something that's very attention grabbing, how is that having long-term effect, both on your internal brand, but also on consumer? If you're going to, even with Green the Bid, we say, don't just look at one project that you want to do perfectly. Look at the whole scope. And no, it's going to be imperfect. But guess what? If you're saying that you're trying to take these steps and you're really honest about where you are, you're less likely actually to be criticized than you are to be able to be a mentor to somebody who's even farther behind than you are, right? Because nobody has one perfect answer, although we are trying to work towards some understandings. But there can be great insights that are learned along the way. So I'm really excited about how all of these conversations come into the fore. And we do need to be honest. Sometimes people, if we're not, then people go, oh, I have this one solution. They go down the way of doing it. And then they learn that, for example, data has huge impact and they've just switched everything to digital or put everything in the cloud only to find, oh, right now I've done this thing that's damaging. The other thing I want to mention, although this is really not my area, but just an area that I have a bit of pet peeves when it comes to comms, is we have to stop putting the responsibility of environmentalism on the consumer. I see these actions where people say, we're trying to work on circularity, but you, the consumer, forgot to recycle or whatever the message is. That's not fair to the consumer. And I actually think that builds in greater tension between brands. But you guys are the experts in that area. I just witnessing this a lot. And I want to say, we got to stop that.
Yeah, for sure. And then I guess I just want to, as I see we're coming to the close of our time, I would just want to think a little bit about how we work together to do this, Katie. And I want to just sort of bug you for some ideas and how you're thinking about that, and what you see that may be working and what isn't working in that partnership area.
Yeah, honestly, meeting you has been phenomenal because you are a connector, and sitting with you within IPG with all these different agencies. I think reaching out to your network is the first step. So I would say if you're a part of a holding company, don't let that hold you back. Definitely use your resources and networks. But the other thing is, and I think Jesse, you might have mentioned this at the very top of the hour, we can't gatekeep any information. Sustainability may be a differentiator, but it can't be something that we hoard different strategies or tools or whatever that may be. I know Green the Bid has open source resources. We have open source resources. It sounds like, Laura, you're sharing all the research and insights that you have, because we have to tackle this together. So it's things like this and making connections. I certainly welcome feedback and criticism on the things that we're doing at the Martin Agency, and also ideas and inspiration, so we can all tackle this together, because we all have one planet. We're not going to solve this alone, and we certainly aren't going to solve it without working together in an integrated fashion.
Okay. Amazing. And Jesse, anything you want to add just practically, if folks are listening and they want to join Green the Bid, how do they do that?
Well, first of all, you can go on to, I put the website URL into the chat, greenthebid.earth. Anybody can join. It's actually free to join. We are an all volunteer organization, and we welcome everybody. We did that because we wanted to eliminate the barrier to entry to this process. And so if you're an individual, you can certainly join as an individual, although we do ask that C-suite folks are obviously sign up on behalf of, let's say, a brand or an agency, because there does need to be a decision about that. Sure. And then we meet with every single member that joins us on a Zoom, very similar to this, to have a conversation about what their journey is and how we can be a resource. We have our tools that are kind of organized by type, by stakeholder type, although we know that there's a lot of blurring of the lines. So we have everything from resources that you can use internally in terms of office resources to checklists to webinars, and how that connects to things like Project Drawdown. We have quarterly member meetings and a lot of things to bring people together. As Katie, you said, it starts with your network. That's how we built Green the Bid. And we're really lucky in some ways because we can all connect with each other pretty easily. And when I say that, I mean, our industry in some ways is global, but also it's not that big. And then how do work together to bridge the gaps between organizations, thinking about why we're here today. I know that there are resources that this organization is developing and working on, and how do we connect that to what we're doing at Green the Bid? So those are kind of some of the ways that we're thinking about it and how we approach it. And yeah, anybody can take a look. It's all open source. And if people want to jump in and volunteer, as some of our members have done, they can help us develop even richer and deeper tools.
That's amazing. Okay, great. And then I don't know, Philip, if there are any questions from the audience or folks watching that we're happy to take. Or maybe not. I'm going to look quickly and just see if I see anything in the chat that we haven't covered.
So I'm just coming back on stage. So first of all, let me say thank you very much for that interesting discussion. I think you covered a lot of subjects. The one first, to everybody listening, now is the time to pose your questions. There's a Q&A tab you'll find just to the left top of the chat column on the right of the screen there. Pop your questions in there and I will field them to the panel for you. So while you're thinking about those, maybe perhaps I'll just launch in with the first one, which is just to say, you spoke quite a lot about greenwashing just a moment ago. And I wonder also, if you look at it from the other side, not only about the importance of greenwashing to brands in particular, but is this also an area where we're starting to see perhaps some false accusations of greenwashing because of the complexities involved?
Yeah, I mean, I know we've seen some, and I think it's honestly, it's part of the process because we are all learning. And I think I like the idea that Katie talked about having an internal team that kind of keeps us honest, if you will. We, of course, all have legal review. We want to make sure that's happening. But more often than not, I think that generally what we're seeing is folks who want to do the right thing, but there are some really fine lines, and it's complex. And so we just need to be super careful, and I think follow the guidelines that our panelists put forward, which is starting with the brief, starting with the intentions, where folks are coming from, and generally everything else will follow. But I'll put in another vote for make sure you involve your legal folks, because these are standards that are set, and they are the experts. So making sure that they're involved at every step of the way, I think will help avoid a lot of problems and put out work that is not only better, but actually does have a real impact.
Very good, thank you. It's one of the things actually that we mentioned in these IPRA guidelines we recently published about climate change communication, and we linked that to a point in our original code of conduct, which basically says you will not provide misinformation to the public. We rather simply say in the guidelines, you will not, and therefore you should not greenwash, and of course, and leave it at that. And on that very subject, the next question comes from Daniel Silberhorn, who is both a board member of our organization, but also is chairing the IPRA climate change chapter. And Daniel is asking, does the advertising industry need guidelines similar to the ones that IPRA publish for public relations on climate change communications?
Yes. Probably.
Okay.
I would say yes. I think guidelines are always helpful, because I think one of the questions in here too is, what's your knowledge source? And we talked about this backstage before we joined. There's a wealth of information out there, and I think the hardest part is sifting through and understanding what is right and what is wrong, or what guidelines should I be following, what targets should I be hitting. There's not one standardized space. As we the FTC is coming out with some green guides that will help that. Some of them I think will potentially be restrictive, and that we'll have to navigate and work on. And then some will be open-ended and give us more guidance on how to have those conversations, potentially give us some common language, as we talked about, that we can all rally around, similar to how you have FDA language for certain things. So I think any guidance is helpful. There's no one wrong or right way to do things. The 4As has a lot of good information. We talked about Add Net Zero being a great resource as well through ANA, I think it is. So I would turn to, at least in the US, some of the larger organizations that sit across folks, and that's a good place to start for some of those guidelines, at least on the advertising front.
I was going to say professional organizations they do really play this valuable role, because we see a lot of alliance with things like AICP or even APCP in Spain, to be able to communicate with and for their constituents, but also to develop those kind of codes of conduct, and then where to point them in the right resource direction, because that's one thing we talked about in the beginning behind the scenes and here, is that people then need to know those next steps. But I think that they provide kind of like a bumper, right? So that people know at least, okay, this is my lane now. And then where I take that, okay, my metaphor is going off the rails now, but where I take that on the journey, where I'm driving is up to me, but I can at least know that, this is kind of gets into an unsafe area, or an area where claims may be outsized or the actions might be irresponsible. And again, I think, Gemma, you said most people that I encounter, and probably you encounter as well, it's actually their actions are rooted in a great desire to do something better. It's just they don't always have all of the information. So to your point, Philip, and to the question, where do we find this? And if we can put some of this material together and that was, again, why Green the Bid did it. It's too messy. We can't, we're all too busy people to be able to go, I'm going to pluck it from here and here. And here. So I think that's where we need to come together and provide those resources, and then keep adding to them and keep updating them as things shift and change.
Oh dear, thank you for that. So a question from Jill Abelson, who I guess is known to at least one of the panelists quite well. And Jill was saying she would love the panel's insights on the current ESG backlash and how long and how deep that will continue. Perhaps in answering that, you could explain a little bit about what the backlash is first, and then think about how long it might continue as a rather broad grouping of commitments.
Wow, who's going to take that one?
You mean the landmine? No, I think it falls into a similar vein as the article that came out in January that laid out the 6 different versions of greenwashing, like green hushing and green shushing and green washing and green labeling and green. And, there is a point at which we fall into the abyss of sort of it. We're trying to slice this so thinly that we're losing the point, which is that you can't sell more of your product on a dead planet, So we got to get out of our own way and stop slicing our definitions, because we're making it harder on ourselves to actually achieve meaningful change in the world. But, I think the FTC's work, and they've issued some guidance, the regulatory environment, which is putting together some standards, even the marriage of GRI and SASB, coming together, those are all helpful sort of pairings and integrations that will reduce clutter. And I think with ESG backlash, I mean, Elon Musk didn't do anybody a favor in tweeting that ESG is dead, but at the same time, he raised a really important question of like, what are we actually talking about here? So, I think we're not done with the scrutiny and the analysis, but I do think we have, especially for those of us who have worked in sustainability communications like Jill has for 30 plus years. Jill used to lead the EPA Energy Star program for many years, and that's how I know her, because she used to be my client way back in the day. But there are people who have been doing this work for 30 plus years and seen all of the iterations of backlash and renaming and new nomenclature. And I think we have a responsibility as communicators to aim for simplicity and clarity, just like you would write a press release. And we need that just as much with ESG, because the backlash will continue because we're making it harder on ourselves.
I think, and the only thing that I would add is I think when we think about the backlash, there is a sort of a segment of the population that's talking about the fact that ESG is not good for companies. And I think we clearly know that is not true. We know that companies who are doing this honestly and, walking the walk and doing the work, but not just the communications around it, are performing better. And certainly we, as folks who work in professional services, we know that's true. And that's how we need to advise our clients. And in terms of how, how long it's going to go on, gosh, I think it's always going to be there. And I think, Laura makes a good point. Like, keep us honest, keep asking the questions, and we need to keep doing the real work. And being honest and being transparent about what we know, what we don't know, and where we still need to do work. Because we get a ton of questions about this. And I think, to my mind, we've just got to tell the truth. We still have some clients in sectors that people ask questions about all the time. And we've done some real thinking about that. We've done some real thinking about how we move forward in that space. We've shared that thinking with our competitors because, as Jesse and Katie and Laura all pointed out, this is something we need to partner on. And I think the honest and transparent partnership is what's going to move us forward.
Okay, thank you for that. I have another question from Winter. He's asking a question about resources, which I think perhaps we've covered in some of the links you already provided in the chat. The second question that I think is rather interesting there. It's going back to what you mentioned of perform, reform, or transform. Can you give some examples of that? I mean, maybe you can't because it's client sensitive, but if you can, that would be helpful.
I could talk about this all day. Performative, and the biggest performative, I think, example from the last few years is every company who used the black Instagram symbol for standing up for Black Lives Matter in 2020, who have yet to set DEI goals, to require that teams have diversity, so we are bringing the right perspectives into the room. Everlane is a great example of performative, right? For all of the transparent work that they have done around sourcing of materials, and they did such great work there for such a long time. When they started talking about social justice, yet they were having their own union and labor problems, and then didn't respond to any of those challenges, we are performative right there, right? Every brand that only shows up for Pride Month to rainbow wash and rainbow symbol their logo and then is never to be seen for the next year. Every company that only attaches a portion of proceeds from a product to support LGBTQIA or trans lives and then is out, that's all performative. Those are great examples. Reformative, I think that Procter & Gamble is a great example of reformative. 14 years ago, Virginie Helios was a brand manager in fabric care. And today she has transformed Procter & Gamble into a leading sustainability global organization with a bold ambition. And they have worked really hard to back their way into doing the right thing across a variety of issues and staying true to their brands, but also true to what the world needs. So I think that's a really great example. I think, a lot of the work that Walmart has done over the years, and they're an innovator, and then from a reformative or a transformative perspective, you're talking about the Patagonias and the Ben and Jerry's of the world, tip of the spear. It is at the center of the brand and the business. They were born that way. It is part of their mission statement. It is, and it never has changed, right? But they are able to take really bold action because it is born into it. It's in their bloodstream, and it has been from the beginning. And like I said, 0.4% of companies today can be that. So hopefully those are good examples.
Excellent. No, very, very good example. Interesting you mentioned P&G, actually. One of the things that IPRA runs is a global awards competition. And we often see entries from all over the world, lots of different countries, with P&G as a client. And consistently you have the ones that the ones that are the winning ones, and the ones that also do with women's empowerment in those countries as well through their product range. Very interesting thing they do there. With a question from Anka in Romania, who's asking, so do you feel that PR agencies have true access to the strategic dimension of companies? Just saying that, he or she saying, I recently conducted an ESG reporting analysis in my country, Romania. I was astonished to see that PR agencies were basically absent from the discussion. Is that a case you find also in the States?
No, I would say, at least from a PR agency perspective, not at all. I think one of the interesting things that I think PR agencies bring is we live at the center of creative and how to transform creative into storytelling across channel, right? And everything that we do is data informed and insights led in the same way that any ad agency would do it. And sometimes forced into more precision because we have to be language strategist. I think we can't just wrap it up into a tagline or an out of home or a 30-second TVC. We actually have to make sure that we are in integrity with column inches, and we have to have the data to cite the claim. And so there is a forcing of greater rigor because a reporter is going to ask for it. They're going to demand that, or they're not going to cover it. So I think that's kind of how we look at all of our assignments. And it's interesting that in Romania, if there's an absence of agencies that are a part of that, and maybe that's an invitation. Maybe there's an opportunity there.
Yeah. And I think that's what's also interesting. Here in the States, we see where sustainability departments have often grown up is on the comms teams. And at IPG, that's the case for our company. So that's a shocking question for me to see, but really interesting because here we sit at the heart of it and making sure that the real work gets done in addition to the reporting around the work.
Yeah. I mean, you have to be thinking about 10 steps ahead, right? What's the action and reaction? So I think that unity is vital. As you described, Laura, I don't think there's a disconnect here in the US, but we can't speak for every PR agency, so I'm not sure. But the conversations that we're having, I saw that somebody put in the chat, what are some misconceptions? And I was thinking about that. You go to a cocktail party and somebody thinks that you work and they say smoke and mirrors. And I think that's actually most of the times the opposite of what we do. And so I'm excited about this conversation because this is illuminating that process, right? That we have an opportunity and a responsibility to really dig into the most important issues of our time and help to be the engineers of that future. Like I think I said before. So, I agree with you, Gemma. If people are feeling that disconnect, that they can actually be the ones that are possibly able to revolutionize what they're experiencing in their PR community, certainly in their own agency, but also just as a country or community. I mean, that's kind of what we're seeing with Green the Bid, right? Is that people are going and taking these principles and then going and working on their own organizations. And that's really exciting. And we're not there to have oversight or dictate how that's done, but to be a catalyst for inspiration. I think there's opportunity here as well.
Yeah, it reminds me of something that I did when my son was in third grade, and his teacher asked me, she knew what I did for a living and understood it, and there wasn't a misconception. And she asked me to come in and speak to a bunch of third graders about what I did for a living. And so I had to walk in and boil it down to how like an 8-year-old was going to understand what I did. And that's a great challenge because you got to be real simple, real fast. And so I walked in and I had one slide that just said, does it hurt nature? That's all you need to know, right? My job is to make sure that anybody that I work with creates programming that tries not to hurt nature. And so if a third grader can get it, we can reduce the misconception. So son Ben says, don't hurt nature.
I think, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
The only thing I was going to say, I think all of that is true. In the US, there is there's definitely more presence of PR and advertising agencies. What I wish I would see more of, however, is more connection with product teams. Some clients give us a peek behind that curtain, and we can help think of new opportunities to help change the system. I think communication and language and the right story and having the right mission is important, because everything starts from that mission. But in practice, I mean, we're still living in a very linear system of an economy. And it didn't used to be that way. It wasn't really until the 50s where we had the throwaway culture, where it kind of changed. It used to be much more circular. But now, if we're going to change the way we do business and the way we produce, or I think there was a question in the comment or in the chat as well about fast fashion, essentially, and you buy something and then it's obsolete. You know, that's where I would like to see some of our creative thinking more infused into the product space or the business plans. I think what we see in culture and the conversations that PR is tapped into and that advertising is tapped into can directly help break the system that we're all currently living in that isn't working. So that's one piece that I would say. I don't know if that's the same in Romania, but that is a missing gap for us, that maybe we have a seat at one table, but we may not have a seat at some of the tables that can help break the system at all times.
No, I think that's a very interesting insight, and I think that's not uncommon in many countries. We've just hit the top of the hour, so we'll be finishing the webinar now. My thanks to all of you, to Jessie, to Gemma, to Katie, and to Laura. That was an excellent and vibrant discussion. I think we've all learnt quite a lot. There were some very good links in the chat. They'll be available, I think, as part of the recording. If not, I also might put them in a little email to attendees, so that you have those also. And just to remind those of you listening, we'll be back again in a month's time, and we'll be hearing in that webinar from the winner. This is Tencent, the company from China, who is the winner of last year's Grand Prix in our awards competition. And we're finding some insights as to how they won and what was so clever about their campaign. Once again, my thanks to the panel, and goodbye to all of you. Goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.